Welcome to the next in our whiteboard series on the Reformation. Today, the Genevan Reformation, Part 2. When we left Calvin last time, he was being exiled from Geneva. He and Farel and another pastor were kicked out from Geneva after only 3 years of working on it in 1538. Calvin went to Strasbourg, but in 1541 he was recalled to Geneva by the magistrates, who felt they really did, in fact, in the end, need his expertise and his talents, so he returned. Unwillingly, but he did return. When Calvin came to Geneva, he was unknown. Nobody knew who this guy was. The first time he appears in the city records, he's described as that Frenchman. The secretary of the magistrates had not even learned his name. And yet, by the end of his life in 1564, Calvin was the chief pastor of Geneva, and his reputation was strong in Geneva and, in fact, across all of Europe. So we need to understand how this happened. The Reformation in Geneva led to the creation of a state church, just like it did in Zurich, just like it did in the Lutheran territories. The magistrates held the purse strings. They were the ones to whom the tithes were paid. They then paid the pastors out of this money. They secularized church lands and used that income. The magistrates were in charge. They were the ones who said what happened, and they were the ones who could approve who served in the Genevan church. So they had a lot of clout. However, the Genevan church was different from the other churches we've seen so far in that the pastors insisted on retaining the right of control over who had access to the Lord's Supper, church discipline, in their own hands. If you fought with your wife, or quarreled with your neighbors, or had some other moral failing, the pastors would want to see you in front of a body known as the consistory, made out of pastors and elders. And they could bar you from the Lord's Supper if your behavior did not match the expected norms. If you did not walk the walk of faith, you might get in trouble with the consistory and need to rework your life to make sure that you lived up to your faith commitments. Now, the pattern of Reformation in Geneva from Calvin's return in 1541 until 1555 was actually very tense. And it was tense for a number of reasons. First of all the pastors serving Geneva in this period were not Genevan born. They were French. They were foreigners in Geneva. Again, Geneva is not part of France. So these are people coming from outside into Geneva, and the pastors operated kind of in the prophetic mode. They preached in the prophetic mode. And that meant that their population felt that the pastors were always kind of angry, always seeming to find fault. So they're foreigners, they find fault. The population is kind of upset about this. That's one problem. Problem number 2. While the Genevan Reformation was becoming stronger, at the same time, it was also spreading in France. But France was a Catholic country with a Catholic king, and French people who became Protestants sometimes had to leave. And one of the places they fled to was Geneva. So there's a strong number of Genevan who are seeing that more and more French religious refugees are arriving in their town. And there's not enough space, and these foreigners are taking their jobs, and maybe that they feel that they're kind of cut out from their own power base. It just upsets the Genevans. They don't like all these refugees coming in. That's another problem. And finally, changes in worship tended to upset people as well. There were a lot of changes in worship that happened just like they did everywhere else. But some Genevans, particularly those who had not had a vote on whether Geneva should be Protestant or not, they objected to this. You find a lot of older ladies in particular who wanted to continue being Catholic. Thank you very much. But of course, the Reformation is a communal one. Everybody has to switch. You don't get to continue being Catholic. If you want to continue being Catholic, you have to leave. And some of these people just did not like these changes, did not come to terms with them well. That meant there were rising tensions in Geneva all the way up to 1555, when there was in fact an abortive riot in the city, where native Genevans rose up and wanted to blame the refugees for all their problems. It didn't work. These native Genevans actually ended up having to leave. And instead, the French refugees, religious refugees who supported Calvin, tended to come to power and supported him. And it's from then on that things in Geneva became rather calmer.